You won't believe what happened when our power-obsessed HOA president tried to demolish my sister's wheelchair ramp while she was away at work. What she didn't know, my sister wasn't just another name on the mailbox. She was the governor of our state, and Karen was about to make the worst mistake of her HOA career. So how did a neighborhood feud explode into a national controversy? Welcome to my channel. Hit that subscribe button if HOA drama is your guilty pleasure. It started with another angry slap of color, a blinding yellow violation notice taped to our front door, the fifth one this month, all fixated on Sarah's wheelchair ramp. I didn't even flinch anymore. I just crushed it in my hand and tossed it into the growing pile of paperwork we had dubbed Karen's Chronicles. I heard the soft hum of Sarah's electric wheelchair as she came up the ramp behind me. "Another love note from our charming neighbor?" she asked, flashing a tired smile. The bags under her eyes betrayed the exhaustion she never voiced. Not from her demanding new job, not from the car crash that changed her life 6 months ago, and certainly not from the HOA president's nonstop pettiness. You'd think being HOA president would give her enough to do without turning into a full-time stalker, I muttered, glaring through our kitchen window. And sure enough, there stood Karen, camera phone in hand, smug as ever, snapping shots of our ramp like she'd caught us hiding nuclear secrets. Her gym-ready outfit and salon-highlighted hair couldn't mask the venom in her stare. I'll never forget the day we installed that ramp. We played by every rule, hired a certified contractor, secured all the necessary permits from City Hall, even painted it the exact gray required by neighborhood guidelines. And yet, Karen appeared like a storm cloud before the concrete even had a chance to dry. "Section 8, Paragraph 3, she declared, waving the HOA rulebook like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "All exterior modifications must receive board approval. We must protect our property values," she said, dripping with faux sympathy. What infuriated me most was her passive-aggressive scheduling. She kept conveniently setting HOA meetings during times Sarah could never attend. Not that it mattered. Sarah was usually too busy, running the entire state. That's right, my sister isn't just any resident. She's the governor. But we kept that under wraps. She wanted peace and privacy during recovery. Just last week, I caught Karen snooping around our front yard at 6 a.m., tape measure in hand. When I called her out, she gave me that overly sweet tone and said she was just fulfilling her duties as HOA president. That's when I started documenting everything, every encounter, every letter, every little move. Something deep inside told me we'd need a paper trail, and this morning felt off. As I helped Sarah into the car for her physical therapy appointment, I saw something across the street. Karen was huddled with 2 men in suits. She kept pointing at our ramp like it was a crime scene, her voice animated, her gestures theatrical. I had no idea at the time, but this was the moment everything began to spiral out of control. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Karen standing near her porch, deep in conversation with 2 men dressed in dark suits. Her arms waved wildly in the direction of our ramp, her expression animated and intense. One man jotted something in a notebook while the other snapped pictures with practiced precision. "This doesn't feel right," I muttered, turning to Sarah. "Maybe it's time we stop playing nice. Maybe they need to know who they're messing with." Sarah just shook her head firmly. "No, I'm not going to use my title to bulldoze our way through this. Ironic as that sounds, we do this the right way, through the system." She always had more faith in procedure than I did. Still, as I watched Karen hand over thick manila folders to the men, her grin smug and victorious, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Something told me rules wouldn't be enough this time. I pulled out my phone and started filming. The wind carried Karen's voice clearly across the yard. "Yes, make sure the bulldozer is here first thing tomorrow morning. The board has signed off on the demolition." My heart stopped. A bulldozer? Surely this wasn't happening. They wouldn't actually tear down a disabled woman's access ramp, would they? As Sarah's car disappeared down the street on her way to physical therapy, I bolted back into the house. I needed to check our surveillance footage, pull out every permit and legal document we had. But what I stumbled across in our files would change everything and make Karen wish she'd never laid eyes on our front porch. The next morning started with an ominous rumble. I was halfway through breakfast when the deep growl of machinery echoed down our quiet street. My spoon clattered against the table as I jumped to the window and froze. There she was, Karen standing triumphantly in our front yard in a bright red blazer, blonde hair styled to perfection, and a stack of papers clutched against her chest like she was guarding state secrets. A man in a neon vest and hard hat stood beside him, nodding along as she pointed directly at the ramp. A massive yellow bulldozer sat in our driveway, its metal blade gleaming in the early light like a warning. Two workers were already circling the ramp, stretching out bright yellow tape measures. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and ran outside, recording as I went. Most of our neighbors were still asleep. The sun had barely risen, but here we were, with heavy equipment ready to destroy the only safe way my sister had to enter her own home. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice trembling despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. Karen turned toward me with that overly pleasant smile she wore like armor. "Oh good, you're up," she said in her usual condescending tone. Her heels sank slightly into the damp grass as she strutted over. "I have an emergency removal order, signed by the HOA board. This structure," she gestured dramatically toward the ramp, "violates Section 4.23 of the community guidelines." She waved the paper in my face, then yanked it back before I could touch it. I took a deep breath, remembering what Sarah always said during press briefings. Stay calm, stay factual. "Karen, we filed every piece of paperwork. The city approved the build. We followed every law." Karen's eyes twinkled with superiority. "The city isn't the HOA, sweetheart. And as president of the board, it's my job to keep our neighborhood looking its best. That ramp is ugly. It's hurting property values. Just look at it. It doesn't blend." Behind us, the bulldozer roared to life. My stomach twisted. I whipped out my phone and opened the files Sarah had made me save. Full property lines, city permits, stamped approvals. "This is illegal," I said, holding up the screen. "You can't destroy someone's property without a court order or proper notice." Karen let out a laugh, high-pitched and theatrical. "Oh, but we did give notice. 3 weeks ago. Certified mail." She held up a paper with a signature I didn't recognize. "Right here." I frantically called Sarah's phone. Straight to voicemail. Of course, she was in that all-day budget session. I tried her assistant, then security. Nothing. No answer. Meanwhile, the construction crew had begun laying down cones across the driveway. One of the workers looked visibly unsure, flipping through his paperwork again and again. I saw him whisper to the other, glancing at something that clearly didn't add up. But the engine was still running, and Karen was still smiling. "If you go through with this," I warned, my voice gaining strength, "you'll be hearing from our attorneys. This is a blatant violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act." I didn't wait for a reply. I pulled out my phone and began live streaming the entire scene, every movement, every word, every inch of that bulldozer. If they were going to do this, the world was going to see it. For the first time, Karen's smug grin flickered, just for a moment. "The HOA is exempt from," she began. "No HOA is above federal law," I yelled, loud enough that porch lights began flickering on up and down the street. Curtains shifted. A door creaked open. Mr. Rodriguez from next door peeked out, saw who was leading the charge, and quietly shut himself back inside. But Karen wasn't hesitating. She had already turned to the bulldozer operator, giving a sharp, confident nod. The machine roared, gears grinding to life as its massive treads chewed up the gravel in our driveway. And then, it happened. The steel blade began to lower. I couldn't breathe. This ramp, the one that took us weeks of careful planning, inspections, permits, and money to build, was about to be reduced to rubble. "Last chance, Karen," I said, phone held steady despite my shaking hands. "You don't want to do this." She glanced back at me, eyes like ice beneath her painted-on smile. "The only mistake," she said coolly, "was ever letting that monstrosity be built. Sometimes people need to learn that rules matter." And then the blade struck. The shriek of metal tearing against concrete ripped through the air. I kept recording as chunks of the ramp broke apart under the force of the bulldozer. But they weren't the only ones recording anymore. Unnoticed by Karen, Mr. Rodriguez had returned, this time with his own phone raised. More neighbors began to gather at the edges of their lawns, robes still on, phones up, mouths open in disbelief. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A message popped up from Sarah's head of security. "Stay calm, keep recording, help is 3 minutes out." For the first time that morning, I smiled. Karen, standing there like she was directing a symphony, hadn't noticed the shift in the air. She was too busy basking in her victory, too caught up in the twisted pride of watching our ramp fall apart. She didn't hear the distant wail of sirens. She didn't see the black SUVs turning slowly onto our street. But I did. Sometimes the biggest disasters come from the smallest oversights, like not knowing that your supposedly helpless neighbor is, in fact, one of the most powerful figures in the state. And Karen, she was about to find that out. I'll never forget the transformation, how our quiet little suburban block turned into a scene straight out of a political thriller. Just as Karen was high-fiving her HOA henchman over the destruction, the first black SUV rounded the corner. Then a second, then a third. Red and blue lights erupted down the street like a warning flare. My hands trembled as I hit record again. This was going to be very interesting. Karen's victorious expression morphed into confusion, then visible panic, as three marked state police vehicles pulled up, immediately followed by 5 identical black government SUVs. The neighbors, once content to spy from behind curtains, now rushed outside, crowding onto their lawns. They didn't know exactly what was happening yet, but everyone could feel it. Something big was going down. "What is all this?" Karen snapped, her voice laced with panic and cracking at the edges. "This is a private HOA matter." She didn't even get to finish her sentence before one of Sarah's lead security officers stepped out of the middle SUV. He scanned the area methodically, then gave a signal. The back door swung open, and then silence. Every conversation, every whisper, every engine died the moment Sarah rolled out, dressed in her crisp gubernatorial blazer. Her face was set with that same unflinching look she wore at high-level press briefings, calm, commanding, and cold as steel. "Actually, Mrs. Thompson," Sarah said, her voice clear and unwavering, "this stopped being a private matter the second you violated federal disability protection laws." She rolled forward slowly, flanked by her security team, who moved with absolute coordination like Secret Service agents on the clock. "Oh, and let's not forget," she added, her tone sharper now, "you also authorized the destruction of state-owned property, without a shred of legal approval." Karen's face was a roller coaster of emotion, confusion, realization, denial, fear, all in a matter of seconds. "State property?" she stammered. "Yes," Sarah confirmed, calmly pulling out her phone. "Would you like to see the title, or would you prefer we begin with Title II of the ADA? I'm well-versed, considering I just signed new protections last month." The street was no longer quiet. Dozens of neighbors were now standing on their lawns. I counted at least 12 phones recording. Mrs. Jenkins, ever the social media queen, was already live-streaming on Facebook. Karen, clutching her violation notices like a lifeline, tried one last stand. But the HOA bylaws clearly state." Sarah cut her off with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Funny you bring those up." She motioned to her assistant, who stepped forward, holding a massive binder thick enough to dent a car hood. "My legal team spent the afternoon reviewing your entire set of HOA bylaws," Sarah said, taking the binder. "Would you like to know what they found?" I zoomed in with my phone as Karen's allies, the once proud board members, began quietly distancing themselves from her like rats fleeing a sinking ship. "Multiple violations of state housing codes," Sarah began. "Documented discriminatory enforcement practices," she continued. "And," she paused for dramatic effect, "irregular financial activity going back at least 3 years." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Karen's skin turned ghost white. Her lips moved, but no words came out, just stunned silence and nervous breaths. "This can't be. I didn't know," she stuttered. "That I was the governor," Sarah said, finishing the sentence with an arched brow, "or that demolishing a disabled person's access ramp without a legal order is a federal offense." Just then, 2 state investigators stepped forward. They weren't smiling. They held open notebooks in one hand and badges in the other. "Mrs. Thompson," one of them said, "we're going to need you to come with us. We have a few questions about today's incident and your HOA's financial records." Karen was led away, still muttering about property values and bylaws, gripping her precious rulebook like it could save her. Sarah turned to face the growing crowd. Even seated in her wheelchair, she radiated a quiet authority that commanded respect. She gestured to the mangled remains of the ramp. "My fellow neighbors," she began, "today isn't just about a ramp. It's not just about my home." She let the silence settle before continuing. "It's about what kind of community we want to be. A community that lifts people up, or one that tears them down over technicalities and power trips." Heads nodded slowly. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked angry. But most of all, they looked awake. As Karen was loaded into the back of a cruiser, still clutching her HOA rulebook like a defeated general holding a tattered flag, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of neighborhood we'd wake up to tomorrow. But one thing was certain, this wasn't just about our street anymore, and the rest of the country was about to find out why. But believe it or not, that wasn't even the wildest part. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was an old friend from high school who'd gone on to become a civil rights attorney. He'd seen the footage going viral and immediately called with bombshell news. Karen had a history. When I opened the files he sent, I couldn't believe it. 3 separate lawsuits, 3 different neighborhoods, 3 eerily similar situations, disabled residents, accessibility issues, wrongful fines, all ending with quiet settlements and Karen moving on to her next HOA like nothing ever happened. But this time, she'd picked the wrong driveway and the wrong day. And more importantly, the wrong governor. Sarah didn't get angry. She got strategic. Within hours, she called an emergency press conference. Cameras swarmed our front lawn, and as reporters jostled for a better view of her, seated in her wheelchair, blazer on, surrounded by broken pieces of the very ramp Karen had tried to erase. Then she dropped the hammer. Sarah unveiled an organized folder of documents, one by one, exposing Karen's violations, not just of federal disability laws, but 17 separate breaches of state housing codes. But what happened next was what truly transformed our neighborhood. One by one, our neighbors began stepping forward with stories of their own. Mrs. Chen from across the street revealed how Karen had forced her to tear out her medicinal herb garden. Mr. Rodriguez brought out paperwork showing he had been fined for installing a wheelchair lift for his father, a decorated veteran. Even the usually reserved Baker family came forward, describing how they'd been threatened over the sensory-friendly playground equipment they'd installed for their autistic son. The silence had shattered. People were speaking up, talking, listening, connecting. Karen, of course, tried to respond the only way she knew how, with control. She scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting to address the unfounded accusations. But this time, no one came, except for her 2 loyal yes-men who looked more uncomfortable than supportive. Meanwhile, our home had transformed into a beacon for change. Sarah had invited local disability rights advocates to speak. Half the neighborhood showed up, not just to learn about housing rights, but to finally feel empowered. Then someone, still unknown to this day, leaked the HOA's financial records, and they were damning. Karen had been diverting fine money into personal home renovations, disguised as board-approved improvements, new granite countertops, a luxury hot tub, even landscaping upgrades, all allegedly for the good of the community. The HOA's attorney resigned immediately. 3 board members followed, submitting resignation emails so scathing they ended up as headline fodder in the local papers. But Karen still wouldn't go down without a fight. The next morning, she showed up at our house with a cease and desist letter in hand, demanding we stop spreading lies. What she didn't expect? To walk into a backyard meeting between Sarah and the state housing commissioner, who had taken a personal interest in Karen's actions over the last 5 years. The moment Karen realized her entire HOA empire was on the verge of collapse was one I'll never forget. Her face felt like a tower crumbling in slow motion. Almost made it all worth it. Almost. But what truly made it worth it was what happened next. One by one, our neighbors began placing signs in their yards. Support accessible housing. By sundown, Karen's home was the only one without one, a symbol of isolation where community had finally taken root. News helicopters circled overhead. National news stations picked up the story. Our quiet suburb had become ground zero for a conversation bigger than any one house, any one ramp, any one HOA. That night, our front lawn turned into a gathering space. People who had once waved from a distance now lingered to share stories and ideas. We started planning, together, a new HOA built on inclusion, not intimidation. And just when we thought the drama had reached its peak, Sarah received new document linking the bulldozing company directly to one of Karen's private contracting firms. Yeah, it was deeper than we'd thought. By the next morning, my phone was exploding with messages. Neighbors from other neighborhoods, some nearby, some across the state, were sharing their own HOA horror stories. News outlets wanted interviews. Advocacy groups wanted quotes. But the message that really stuck with me, an email from Mrs. Rodriguez. She'd found something. Proof that Karen had broken even more rules, including laws unrelated to housing, all while pretending to be a legitimate HOA president. Except she never even filed the paperwork. She just quietly assumed control when the old president moved away, and nobody questioned her. Until now. Fueled by caffeine and righteous fury, I spent the entire day printing out every HOA bylaw and highlighting every rule Karen had stomped on. And then something incredible happened. Our story reached Tommy Chin, the viral YouTube lawyer known for calling out corrupt HOAs and landlords. And just like that, things were about to go even more public. When Tommy Chin landed the next day, it felt like a celebrity had arrived in our little town. The famous YouTube lawyer known for exposing corrupt HOAs flew in just to meet with Sarah. And after hearing everything, he didn't hesitate. "I'll represent you pro bono," he said. "Let's take them down." He filmed a video about our case right there on the porch, with the ruins of the ramp still visible in the background. Within 24 hours, the video had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments, and more support than we could have imagined. Karen, in one last desperate attempt to salvage her power, called for an emergency HOA meeting. But this one was nothing like the others. Gone were the empty chairs and board members. The community center was packed. People who had stayed silent for years were finally ready to speak. Mr. Jenkins stood up first, holding photos of the treehouse Karen made him tear down, the one his daughter had helped him build by hand. The Wilson family spoke next, sharing how Karen fined them for holiday lights she claimed were too distracting. Story after story poured out, a flood of frustration, pain, and long-suppressed truth. Then Sarah rolled up to the microphone. She didn't just talk about the ramp. She announced something far bigger. "For the past 6 months," she said, "my team and I have been working on a new state bill, one that would protect homeowners from HOA abuse and restore dignity to neighborhoods like ours." The crowd held its breath. "We're calling it the Right to Home Happiness Act." The room erupted in applause. But the final blow came from our own security camera footage that proved Karen had forged HOA approval to demolish the ramp. The moment that played on Tommy's channel showed her lying outright on official forms. That's when even her own lawyer had enough. He dropped her case on the spot. 2 days later, we stood at the end of our street and watched something surreal. Karen, defeated, dragging out her signature rose bushes and packing up her car. The same bushes she had forced everyone else to copy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She was leaving. And in her place, something amazing began to grow. The newly elected HOA board took over with a vision, not of rules and fines, but of kindness and connection. They turned the old violations office into a community help center. Instead of penalties, newcomers received welcome baskets. Elderly residents were offered free home repair assistance. And Sarah's ramp, rebuilt, better than ever. This time, local artists painted it with colorful flowers. It even lit up at night with soft, glowing lights. Kids from the neighborhood called it the prettiest thing on the block. Last week, Sarah hosted a backyard barbecue for the entire community. Laughter echoed where Karen once stood barking about lawn height codes. And as I stood beside the grill, watching neighbors pass around plates and stories, something hit me. Sometimes the worst moments can spark the best transformations. Even the Bulldozer Company, once part of the problem, reached out. Their CEO personally apologized to Sarah and announced a new initiative: free ramp installations for disabled residents statewide. They even launched a scholarship fund for students studying disability law. But nothing surprised me more than what happened next. I got promoted to head the state's homeowner protection office. My first task, teaching other neighborhoods how to turn their HOAs from weapons into allies. Sarah was right. We were just getting started. And now, 1 year later, our story has made it into school textbooks, an example of what it means to challenge unjust systems and protect the vulnerable. But the real win? It's not in the legislation, the headlines, or even the scholarship funds. It's in the little things, like Mrs. Rodriguez's gnome collection, proudly expanding every week, like the sound of children playing on front lawns without fear of fines, like the way people talk to one another now. Just last week, Karen's old house finally sold. A lovely family moved in, 3 kids, 2 dogs, and a wheelchair ramp installed for their grandmother. And not one person complained. In fact, 5 neighbors showed up to help them unpack. That's when I knew. We didn't just change an HOA, we changed hearts. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true tales of justice, community, and standing up to abuse of power. Share this video to raise awareness about homeowners' rights and help others find the courage to speak out. Your voice matters. Let's build better neighborhoods together.